Hello, you're watching Spirit of Life. I'm Currie, your host for this episode. We'll be talking about the movement of love in our lives. And we're speaking with Preece. Gordon's an Anglican minister, and he's the chair of the Anglican Social Responsibility Committee. He's director of Ethos Centre of Christianity and Society, and senior policy advisor for Catholic Social Services in Victoria. Thanks for coming in again.
Pleasure, Noel.
Now, you're also, I didn't put it in there, but you're a sort of prolific writer as well. So would that be a good way to describe you? I think.
Yeah, I do get, I've been fortunate enough to be published.
Yeah, you've published quite a bit, you certainly have. And just sort of going down those things, the things which fascinate me, and I realise that some of these are co-authored, but one's not, this Preece is not, is rethinking Peter Singer and the Christian critique.
Yep.
Now that's quite a topic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I actually got to debate Peter once up in Sydney, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. And he's a person with a lot of integrity according to his own lights.
Yes, that's right.
I would disagree with him on quite a few things, but there are other things where I'd really want to work with him on, like ecology and protection of animals and reducing the gap between the rich and the poor, those sorts of things.
And you found, and this is not a judgment, I'm not asking for a character assessment of Peter Singer, but you found that you were able to strike a respectable and respecting accord in your discourse.
Yeah, like it's pretty clear where we disagree about, say, the valuing of human life from womb to tomb, if you like, particularly at either end.
Yeah.
I think Peter tends to take a very, if you like, logos or word-based approach in terms of rationality.
Yes.
I decided that in these issues, often you hear about tragic cases, like say in euthanasia or whatever. I decided I was going to address some of both the ethos, to use a Greek term for character, and also the pathos side of suffering and emotion. And so, for instance, I told a story about my father who died just the previous year, and in a wonderful Catholic nursing home overlooking Shelley Beach in Cronulla in Sydney, about 400 metres from his apartment and where his second wife was, my stepmother. And anyway, one time I was there and they'd put on The Sound of Music. Now, I call this my Sound of Music argument against euthanasia. And basically what they didn't put on a video, they didn't bring in some troupe of professional actors or something like that. The people who lived there basically put it on. The elderly put that on, and they made up the band. They were dressed up as the nuns with black plastic garbage bags on their heads. There was Maria and the captain, etc., and some Nazi soldiers, I think, tossed in there somewhere. And then they had the whole upper year, I think, of the Catholic primary school who were there. So there were about 100 kids there. Yeah. And there was a wonderful speech, very genuine speech about how much they'd enjoyed it. And then they all went around and basically spoke to the people who were around in their wheelchairs or whatever. Spoke to my dad, who couldn't participate in the actual performance due to his whole system's Parkinson's. But he smiled. He really enjoyed it and it typified for me. And I said this in the debate with Peter Singer: assisted living. Yes. Not just thinking about assisted dying. There's a step back from that. Is to how do we actually assist people to live until they die?
Yes.
And for me, this was before I was working for Catholic Social Services Victoria, but for me that exemplified the ethos of a Catholic care for people and love for people from the womb right through to the tomb. And so I'd written an article that was on, it's basically called God Knows. And it was basically about the experience of our first grandchild being born in 2016, and then his grandfather, his great grandfather, dying later that year.
Right.
And based on Psalm 139, that God knows us.
Yes.
Even in the tomb.
Yeah.
And God knows us even when we're unconscious.
Yep.
Even when I was sitting next to him while he was dying.
Yeah.
And had the hymns playing from a tape that I'd got for him, his favourite hymns and that. And I was just kind of singing along. Some people say I've got a voice to wake the dead, but it didn't actually happen, or but yeah, I think those kinds of things I think are critical. And if you're going to have an ethic and a spirituality, you're going to have one that's going to sustain people from womb to tomb. Yeah. Not just in the sunshiny kind of parts of life.
No.
If it's going to be real love.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to look at it, as you say, assisted living rather than assisted dying, because it gives a totally different nuance. The language is amazing. Well, it sounds to me as though, and you could maybe comment on this. We'll run out of time in a sec, so we'll do it in the next portion. However, the role of, you've got Peter Singer's perspective and your perspective was there in the middle between there, an identifiable common ground, which was not an intellectual exercise, it was actually a feeling exercise. Did you experience that? And it was a wonder we haven't got Peter Singer sitting here. That would be really good.
Well, a one-liner would be, I think we're both committed to reducing suffering where possible.
Okay. We'll reduce suffering here for this moment. We'll go to a break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Spirit of Life, and we're speaking with Gordon Preece. Gordon, that was a very interesting conversation about your interface with Mr. Singer. Now, you've written, and as a contributor to this book that you have there, and I've got a little excerpt from it here, or a little précis from it. I'd ask you to, because the title of the book, and this is the full title, is it Rehumanizing Precarious Work, Vocation in Location versus a New Priesthood of Cosmopolitan Techno-Creatives. That's big.
That's a bit of a mouthful.
It's big, isn't it?
Yeah, the title of the actual book is Transforming Vocation.
Yeah.
And then the other bits, that's the subtitle.
That's a subtitle, right.
So I'll work on the transforming vocation part, I think.
Yes, right.
So vocation, people often talk about, vocational guidance or a job or something like that. The way Christians use it, it's a calling.
Yeah.
And the calling is to God and to other people, and I'd also want to emphasise to care of the creation.
Yeah.
And while we've been made to kind of rule over creation, we're meant to rule over it by serving, like Christ did.
Yep.
And bringing healing, etc. And we're very conscious of those sorts of things now.
Yes.
So the particular book came out of a conference at Moreland College, Baptist College up in Sydney, and there were people from all over Australia, and really trying to look at some of the changes that are going on, and it was held just before COVID. Like, there's another whole layer that comes with COVID because right. COVID's kind of shown up the cracks in our society in between rich and poor, but also between those who are more exposed in terms of their jobs, who are working in abattoirs, or people who are working in medical areas, etc., who are at considerable risk. People who are, there's been a lot about people just being burnt out in those sort of areas, or with Catholic Social Services. People have lost a lot of volunteers in that over time because most volunteers are relatively old.
Yeah.
They're worried about their health, and often to have a break of say 2 years and to their normal patterns, it's fairly hard to go back after something like that.
That's right.
Or the chopping and changing, they tend to find that harder to do that.
Yeah.
You know, you might be back for a month and then they've stopped, and they might get to the point they just say, "Oh, no,
we'll give this a break.
I'll give it a break."
Yeah.
And so I think there are a lot of implications for work, paid and unpaid, that have come out of COVID and what it's led to. And there's a fair bit of debate going on about younger people who are feeling like someone wanting to walk away. Some people want to, well, it can be related to where you live, like issues like wanting to take a tree change or a sea change, and work less, perhaps. The issues about educating kids at home. So the addition in terms of care, how much more demanding caring kind of roles are now, and technology may help, but it doesn't necessarily solve things.
No.
It's not easy. I've had experience with, in some ways, with grandkids online, and they're not necessarily wanting to just. They're used to watching things that are very sophisticated, and mum or dad or granddad or someone trying to teach them a school class isn't an easy gig at all.
No.
So I think there's a lot of issues around about people perhaps wanting to re-engineer their workplace and their longer term view. A lot of young people having their first experience through this and losing jobs. A lot of the ones like, you know, hospitality while they're going through university or whatever, those sorts of roles. People who might be into the arts and being creative, etc. They've had a really rough trot. And those people are often actually sustaining themselves with work in hospitality industries as well. And so I guess what I was trying to say in my section was, there's been a lot of talk about the creative class and the rise of the creative class. That was a book written in 2002 by Richard Florida. He's since written about the demise and the problems that have happened, and that you've, amongst some, I call them kind of techno-creatives in a way, that some of those have actually, they've almost become monopolies. And then in the inner cities of various places, a place like Seattle, for instance, or Melbourne. But then you've got another layer of people who are more like the servant class or might be working in hospitality, but they're getting a pretty raw deal, and it's very precarious. And we're finding that precarious kind of work is taking over in all different sorts of parts of society. Some suffer more from it, but we're seeing it operating at different levels in different places, and that is a major, major problem.
And what's the outcome or the potential outcome of this precarious work? How does it influence the development of social values?
I think it can make people just feel like tools or instruments, not people. And that when they're getting chopped and changed or dropped, and there aren't proper safeguards for them or proper concerns about their safety. There's been quite a lot about that in the gig economy, and people dying in accidents on their scooters or their bikes. And a lack of stability to provide those kinds of things that unions have worked really hard to provide for, say, full-time workers and others, haven't been extended in flexible ways through part-time work or the gig economy. And so I think there's a lot that needs to be thought through if we're going to transform vocation, or if we're actually going to make work that someone can think of as a calling, or where they feel like they're making a contribution or something creative. We're going to have to do a lot more work on that.
Thanks, Gordon. We're out of time. We'll be back. We'll be back in a moment.
Spirit flowing in me. Love, love, oh, till I be but breath of thy Spirit flowing in me.
Welcome back. You're watching Spirit of Life, and we're speaking with Gordon Preece. Gordon, that was very interesting about the gig economy and the participants in that. That's very dehumanizing. One of the important things for human beings, I think, is to have a sense of purpose, a sense of identity. How do you think that's influencing that?
Well, I think, I talked about character earlier on and ethos. To have character, you've got to have some sense of a story and some sense of stability about that, some sense of moving through life, like rites of passage.
Yes.
And I was talking to a young guy the other day. He did well in his VCE, but he wants to have a gap year because it's just been really hard.
Yes.
And you didn't necessarily get to go away for schoolies.
No.
Now, there's some issues about schoolies, but you didn't get to have that sense of really going through with company in a kind of cohort, and some of the friendships that are really important to you.
Yeah.
Studying together, when you're kind of battling on and encouraging each other, helping people out, all of that. A lot of that's been missing, and I think young people have suffered really severely.
Yes.
And the mental health measurements show that that's been really bad, as well as at the other end, probably certainly aged care, older people, and especially older women, who have been quite a danger of fastest growing homelessness group. So again, that's another part of people's stories. They've often, they might have been bashed up by their partners or whatever.
Yes.
They lose their house. They lose that sense of their story. Their kids lose that. And so that's a challenge in terms of their own character, their own role in life.
Yeah.
And how do we provide a greater sense of stability in those facing those challenges if everything starts to become precarious? And it's called Liquid Modernity by Zygmunt Bauman, who's a Polish-Jewish sociologist, late now. But that sense in which everything's chopping and changing, it's like the waves being tossed and challenged and sort of feeling like you're drowning.
Yeah.
Facing those kinds of rapidly changing contexts where everything's liquid.
Where everything's liquid, that's right. And so you're looking for that which isn't liquid. And so if we go back to the thing we've been alluding to all through, is the consistency of love and caring. That is a constant. And can you see that arising, like the gig economy, just to use that term, love and caring to a person who's lost a sense of real solid identity? I work for this and I am this. What's going to hold them together with everyone else?
Yeah, well, Bauman actually says that when you get a job, you should put up a sign until further notice to keep that in mind. So he's reacting against a kind of romantic notion of that.
Yes, yes.
It's a bit like, the idea of the one that you can marry.
Yes,
that kind of idea. It's very romantic and that,
Yes.
But then someone might die or they might be divorced or whatever, and they do actually find someone else perhaps, and they may learn a lot in the meantime,
the process,
and do a better job next time. But I think there is that sense of stability that's really crucial in terms of being able to take steps to make sense of a story, to have a sense of purpose. That doesn't mean one job for life.
No.
But for some people that works out that way, maybe in the high professions, perhaps. But it does mean a sense of security, be able to build basic relationships, etc., to be able to get a home.
Yes.
Younger people can't afford to get a home now. You
No.
know, we've just got this crazy situation. The Great Australian Dream's turned into the Great Australian Nightmare.
Yeah.
And so how do you build stable relationships
Yeah.
if you're just going from one rental property to another? We don't have long-term rent like
No.
the Germans. Even places like New York actually have some of that. And where I think that's one of the big missing links is not having longer-term rental,
Yes.
where you can actually decorate the place the way you would like.
Yeah.
And the Europeans have been doing that for decades. I'm not sure why we can't do that.
That's exactly right. Who knows why we can't do it? But the more you speak about it, this precariousness that keeps coming up all the time, that could lead to. Or let me come back and say, how do you see your role in those three organisations I mentioned, particularly the Catholic one? How do you see your role in countering that in your own organisational way? What would you be doing?
Well, let's take up what the Catholics have been trying to do, and it's Catholic Social Services Victoria, where I am, and the Australian Catholic Social Services. They came out with material about the caring economy.
Yeah.
And I've spoken in things we've submitted to the government about. Well, in Victoria, it's an infrastructure government. You know, they're a building government. They're doing all that. And I say that's great, and yes, it's fantastic. We're building more housing, etc. I don't think it's so good to be building more prisons. I think we ought to be building even more housing.
That's right.
The more housing you build, less people will end up in prison.
Yeah.
Speaking about social housing and public housing.
Yeah.
It's simply a fact. And so you've got to look upstream and how you can seek to prevent some of those problems that are coming out of people who are kind of falling out of the economy in some ways.
Yes.
And it's only in a, let's say, very informal and sometimes criminal economy that they're able to survive in.
This really upsets me to have to do this, but we're not just falling out of the economy, we're also falling out of time. Thank you so much for making yourself available.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
I did warn you that I may ask you to come and talk about some other issues later.
Sure.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Gordon. You've been watching Spirit of Life. We'll be back next week, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit. Blow